The incident. The neighborhood was quiet that evening, the streetlights casting long shadows over the cracked pavement. A faint drizzle softened the edges of the world, muting sounds and blurring the glow of headlights. It was the kind of evening where nothing should have gone wrong, but it did. At approximately 7:15 p.m., a police car tore down the residential street, its siren silent, but its lights flashing. The driver, Officer Grant Morrison, was responding to a reported break-in nearby. Witnesses later described the patrol car as moving too fast for the narrow, rain-slicked road. At the same moment, Elena Russo, a mother of 4, stepped into the street, holding a bag of groceries. Her children trailed behind her, their laughter filling the air as they recounted stories from their day. The collision was instantaneous. The shock of impact, the children's laughter turned to screams as the police car struck Elena. The sound of the impact echoed down the street, followed by the screech of brakes. Groceries scattered across the wet pavement, apples rolling into gutters, a carton of eggs smashed into a pale yellow pool. Officer Morrison stumbled out of the car, his face pale. "I didn't see her," he shouted, his voice cracking. He looked down at Elena's motionless body, his hands shaking as he reached for his radio. The children huddled together on the sidewalk, their tears mingling with the rain. One of them, a boy no older than 10, kept whispering, "She's just sleeping, she'll wake up." A community in mourning. News of the accident spread quickly. Neighbors gathered, their faces etched with shock and disbelief. Some comforted the children, while others directed sharp glares at Officer Morrison, whose uniform now seemed like a mockery of safety. "How could you not see her?" one man demanded. There was something," Morrison stammered, but he didn't finish. The fractured family. In the days that followed, the Russo family struggled to process their loss. Elena's husband, Marco, was a stoic man by nature, but even he couldn't mask his devastation. At the funeral, he stood silently beside the casket, his hand resting on the polished wood as tears rolled down his face. The children, too young to fully grasp the finality of death, asked questions no one could answer. Why did the car hit her? Didn't the officer see the light? Where did she go? Marco avoided their questions, but their eldest daughter, 16-year-old Mia, wasn't satisfied with silence. A city on edge, the accident sparked outrage in the community. Protests erupted outside the police station, demanding accountability and transparency. But as the investigation progressed, strange details began to emerge. The dashcam footage, reviewed by both the police and independent investigators, showed something inexplicable. A flickering light appeared in the corner of the screen moments before the collision. It wasn't a street light or a reflection. It moved erratically, darting toward Elena just before the impact. Investigators dismissed it as a glitch, but the Russo family wasn't convinced. The driver's regret. Officer Morrison, once confident and composed, began to unravel. He stopped sleeping, haunted by dreams of the collision. It wasn't just the rain, he told a colleague. There was something else, a shadow in the road. I thought it was a person, but when I swerved, it was gone. And then she was there. The department recommended counseling, but Morrison refused. "I don't need help," he insisted, though his shaking hands and bloodshot eyes suggested otherwise. The blame and the burden. The Russo family's grief turned to anger. Mia, in particular, fixated on Officer Morrison. "He killed her," she said to anyone who would listen. But Marco, worn down by sorrow, tried to temper her fury. "It was an accident," he said. "What good will hate do?" Mia's voice rose. "Good? It won't do any good, Dad. But it's all we have left." Her words highlighted a rift that began to grow within the family, a divide between those who sought justice and those who wanted peace. Human psychology, a catalyst for horror, grief, guilt, anger. Each emotion took root in the aftermath of the accident. Elena's death became a crucible, magnifying the weaknesses and fears of everyone involved. For the Russo family, grief turned inward, breeding resentment and isolation. Marco's stoicism became a wall between him and his children, while Mia's anger festered into obsession. For Officer Morrison, guilt became paranoia, driving him to question his own sanity. His belief that he saw something in the road before the crash hinted at deeper fears, of losing control, of becoming a monster in the eyes of others. These emotions created the perfect environment for something darker to take hold, foreshadowing the unseen. One night, as Mia sat in her room, scrolling through online forums about paranormal phenomena, her laptop screen flickered. The video of the dashcam footage, which she had replayed countless times, began to distort. The flickering light appeared again, but this time it moved closer, filling the screen. For a moment, Mia thought she saw a face in the glow, gaunt, featureless, and watching her. She slammed the laptop shut, her heart racing. But when she turned, she saw it again, a faint light hovering just outside her bedroom window. Cliffhanger ending. Mia ran to Marco's room, her voice trembling. "Dad, there's something outside." Marco sighed, his exhaustion evident. "It's just your imagination, Mia." But as he turned toward the window, his expression changed. The light was there, flickering faintly against the glass. And in the silence, they both heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible. "Come closer." Shadows on the dashcam. The flickering glow of the laptop screen was the only light in the Russo family's dimly lit living room. Marco sat at the dining table, his hands clenched around a cup of untouched coffee. Mia hovered nearby, her arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the laptop. They had watched the dashcam footage twice already, and both times the same eerie sensation filled the room, a mixture of dread and disbelief. "Play it again," Mia insisted, her voice sharper than she intended. Marco hesitated but clicked the play button. The footage. The video began with a clear view of the street, the patrol car's headlights slicing through the drizzle. The timestamp indicated it was just moments before the collision. At first, everything seemed normal. The rain streaked across the windshield, and the faint hum of the engine accompanied the officer's breathing. But then, it happened. A flickering light appeared in the upper right corner of the screen. It was faint at first, almost like a reflection, but as the patrol car sped forward, it grew brighter and more erratic. "Pause it," Mia said, leaning closer. Marco paused the footage, freezing the image. The light seemed to pulse, and within its glow, there was something unsettling, a vague outline, as though the light had a shape. "Do you see that?" Mia asked, her voice trembling. Marco shook his head, his eyes narrowing. "It's just a glare, a glitch." But even as he said it, he didn't sound convinced. The shadow in the frame. They continued watching. As the light darted across the screen, the patrol car veered slightly, the headlights swaying. The faint outline of Elena and her children appeared at the edge of the frame. And then, impact. But just before the collision, the light seemed to change. It no longer flickered but surged, and for a split second, a shadowy figure emerged within it. Mia gasped. "There! Did you see that?" Marco rewound the footage, pausing at the exact moment. The shadow was clearer now, tall, humanoid, but distorted, as though it didn't fully belong in the frame. "A family divided. We have to show this to someone," Mia said, her voice resolute. "This isn't normal, Dad." Marco rubbed his temples, his exhaustion evident. "Mia, it's just an artifact. The camera isn't perfect. These things happen. It's not just a glitch," she snapped. "You saw it too, that thing." Marco stood, his tone firm. "Enough. We've been through enough already. I'm not going to let you scare your brothers and sisters with ghost stories." Mia opened her mouth to argue, but stopped. The look in her father's eyes wasn't just frustration, it was fear. Seeking answers, frustrated, Mia turned to the internet for answers. She uploaded a clip of the dashcam footage to an anonymous forum dedicated to paranormal investigations, captioning it, "What is this? Light anomaly or something more?" Within hours, the post had dozens of comments. Some dismissed it as a reflection, while others offered more sinister theories. That's not a glitch. That's an energy manifestation. Looks like a shadow person. They're drawn to tragedy. Whatever that is, it was in control. You can see it steer the car. One comment stood out. It's a watcher. They don't just observe, they manipulate. The officer's nightmare. Meanwhile, Officer Morrison wasn't faring much better. The footage haunted him, replaying in his mind every time he closed his eyes. But the dreams were worse. In his nightmares, he was back in the patrol car, driving down that rainy street. The flickering light appeared again, but this time it didn't stay in the corner of the windshield. It moved closer, seeping into the car like mist. When he turned his head, it was sitting in the passenger seat, a shadowy figure with hollow eyes. "You saw me," it whispered. Morrison woke with a start, drenched in sweat. He didn't sleep the rest of the night. A cryptic warning. Back at the Russo home, Mia received a private message on the forum. "Delete the video. You don't know what you're dealing with." Mia's fingers hovered over the keyboard as she stared at the message. It was from an anonymous account, created minutes earlier. She typed back, "Who are you?" The response was almost immediate. "Someone who's seen what they can do. Stop looking, or they'll notice you." The children's drawings. The next day, Mia found her younger brother, Ben, drawing at the kitchen table. He was only 8, but his face was unusually serious as he worked on his sketch. "What are you drawing?" she asked, leaning over his shoulder. Ben turned the paper toward her. The drawing showed a crude outline of their mother lying in the street, surrounded by a bright light. But within the light was something else. A dark figure, with elongated arms and no face. Mia's blood ran cold. "Ben, where did you see this?" He shrugged. "In my dream. Mommy said it was coming for her." The gathering storm. That night, Mia confronted Marco again, showing him Ben's drawing and recounting the anonymous message. "Dad, this isn't just about the accident. There's something bigger going on." Marco sighed, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his grief. "Mia, I don't have the energy for this. I just want us to heal." "But we can't heal if we're ignoring the truth," she shouted. Before Marco could respond, the lights in the house flickered, and a sudden chill filled the air. In the silence, they both heard it, the faint sound of static, like the hum of a distant radio. Cliffhanger ending. Mia grabbed the laptop and played the dashcam footage again, her hands shaking. This time, the light appeared brighter, and the shadow within it seemed to move deliberately, turning toward the camera. As the screen froze on the shadow's form, the room plunged into darkness, and a whisper filled the air. "Keep watching." The children's nightmares. The Russo house was eerily quiet that night. After dinner, Marco sat in the living room with the TV on low, the flickering images doing little to distract him from the weight of his thought. Mia retreated to her room, headphones on, as she scoured forums for answers about the light and the shadow. In the children's shared bedroom, Ben and his younger sister, Sophie, drifted off to sleep. But the silence didn't last long. The first nightmare. Ben stirred, his small frame twisting beneath the covers. In his dream, he stood on the same street where their mother had died. The rain fell in slow, heavy drop, and the world around him seemed muted, as though it existed underwater. He saw his mother in the distance, standing on the other side of the street. She smiled at him, but something about her expression was off. Too still, too perfect. "Mom?" he called out, his voice echoing unnaturally. She didn't respond. Instead, the light appeared behind her, flickering and growing, until it enveloped her completely. As the light brightened, a shadowy figure emerged from within, tall and faceless. Its elongated arms reached out toward Ben, and he froze, unable to move. "You shouldn't have looked," the figure whispered, its voice low and resonant. Ben woke with a scream, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. Shared visions. Sophie stirred awake, startled by Ben's scream. "What's wrong?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. "I saw it again," Ben said, his voice trembling. "The light, and the thing inside it." Sophie frowned, her own face pale. I saw it too. Ben stared at her, his fear growing. What did you see? Sophie hesitated, then whispered, Mommy was in the light, but she wasn't alone. The thing was holding her, like it wouldn't let go. Mia's discovery. The children's screams drew Mia into their room. She found Ben crying and Sophie clutching her stuffed rabbit tightly. What's going on? Mia asked, kneeling beside them. Ben tried to explain, but his words came out in a jumble of fear and confusion. Finally, Sophie spoke up. It's the light, it's coming for us now. Mia's blood ran cold. She didn't want to scare them further, but deep down she knew they weren't imagining things. Later that night, she sat on her bed with her laptop, replaying the dashcam footage again. This time, she noticed something new, an audio anomaly just before the collision. When she amplified the sound, she heard faint whispers beneath the engine's hum. She froze as the words became clear. We're waiting. The sleepwalking incident. The next night, Mia woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. She got up, her heart pounding, and found Ben standing in the middle of the corridor, his eyes wide but unseeing. Ben? She called softly. He didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked toward the front door, his steps slow and deliberate. Mia grabbed his arm, shaking him gently. Ben, wake up. He blinked, his expression confused. What happened? You were sleepwalking, Mia said, trying to stay calm. Where were you going? Ben looked at her, his voice trembling. They said I had to go outside. They said Mom was waiting for me. Marco's frustration. The next morning, Mia told Marco about Ben's sleepwalking and the strange whispers on the footage. We can't ignore this, Dad, she said. Something's happening to us. Marco sighed, his exhaustion evident. Mia, we've been through a lot. The kids are having nightmares because they're scared, and you're seeing things because you're not letting yourself grieve. Mia's frustration boiled over. You're not listening. This isn't just grief. There's something else, is something wrong. Marco stood abruptly, his face hard. I'm doing my best to hold this family together. Mia, stop making it harder. A cry for help. That afternoon, Mia called the paranormal investigator, who had commented on her forum post. The man, who went by the alias Duncan, agreed to meet her at a cafe. It's not just a light, Duncan said after she explained everything. It's a lure. These things use it to draw people in. What are they? Mia asked, her voice trembling. Duncan hesitated. We call them shadows, but that's not exactly right. They're old, older than we can understand, and they feed on fear, grief, and guilt. That's how they grow stronger. Foreshadowing the entity. That night, Mia watched over Ben and Sophie as they slept, determined to protect them. But as the hours passed, her resolve began to falter. Around 3 a.m., she noticed the temperature in the room drop sharply. Her breath came out in visible puffs, and the shadows in the corners seemed to stretch toward the children's beds. And then, she saw it, the light. It flickered outside the window, casting an eerie glow across the room. Mia stood, her heart pounding, as the light grew brighter. Within it, the shadowy figure appeared again, its faceless head turning slowly toward her. She felt frozen, unable to move as the figure reached out, its whisper filling her mind. You're next. Cliffhanger ending. Mia blinked, and the figure was gone. But when she turned back to the children, she saw that Ben's hand was clutching something, a piece of paper covered in jagged, angular symbols. Mia's breath caught as she recognized the symbols from the dashcam footage. She didn't know what they meant, but one thing was clear. The entity wasn't done with them. The officer's guilt. Officer Grant Morrison sat alone in his dimly lit apartment. The only sound was the steady drip of a leaky faucet in the kitchen. The walls seemed to close in around him, the silence oppressive. His uniform hung on the back of a chair, a constant reminder of the night that had changed everything. He hadn't slept in days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the collision, the flash of the light, the woman's terrified face, the sudden impact. But it wasn't just the memory that haunted him. there was something else, something darker. The flickering light. Morrison poured himself another drink, hoping to drown the whispers that had followed him since the accident. At first, they had been faint, indistinct murmurs at the edge of his hearing. But now, they were louder, more insistent. "You saw us. You can't hide. We're waiting." He rubbed his temples, the sound drilling into his skull. "Leave me alone," he muttered. But the whispers didn't stop. Instead, the lights in the apartment flickered, casting long shadows across the room. Morrison froze, his breath catching in his throat. In the corner of the room, where the shadows were darkest, something moved. The night of the crash, Morrison replayed the events of that night in his mind, trying to make sense of what he had seen. He had been driving down the rain-slicked street, his focus on the call he was responding to, a break-in at a nearby house. The patrol car's lights flashed, but its siren was off to avoid alerting the suspect. Then he saw it. A flickering light appeared at the edge of his vision, darting across the road. It wasn't a reflection or a glare, he was sure of that. It moved with purpose, as though it were alive. Instinctively he swerved, his heart racing. But as the light disappeared, Elena Russo stepped into the street. He didn't have time to brake. The memory made him shudder. The light hadn't just distracted him, it had led him into the collision. The first hallucination, the whispers grew louder as the days passed, their tone mocking and cruel. Morrison began seeing things in the corners of his vision, shadows that didn't belong, flickers of movement that disappeared when he turned his head. One night, as he sat at his desk reviewing paperwork, his phone buzzed. The screen showed an incoming call from an unknown number. He hesitated before answering. "Hello?" A voice on the other end, deep and distorted, whispered, "We saw you." Morrison's hand trembled as he dropped the phone, his heart pounding. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch toward him, and for a moment, he swore he saw a figure standing by the window, a tall, faceless form with elongated arms. The decline. Morrison's colleagues noticed his change in behavior. Once confident and composed, he now seemed jumpy and distracted. His hands shook during briefings, and he avoided eye contact. "Grant, are you okay?" his partner, Officer Decker, asked one afternoon. Morrison forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired." But Decker wasn't convinced. "You've been off since the accident. Maybe you should take some time off." "I'm fine," Morrison snapped, his voice harsher than intended. Decker raised an eyebrow, but didn't push further. A visit to the scene? Desperate for answers, Morrison returned to the scene of the crash one rainy evening. The street was quiet, the faint glow of streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement. He parked his patrol car and stepped out, his boots splashing in shallow puddles. The spot where Elena had fallen seemed to radiate an unnatural cold, and the air was heavy with the scent of damper. As he stood there, the light appeared again, flickering faintly at the edge of his vision. "Show yourself," he shouted, his voice echoing in the stillness. The light grew brighter, and within it, a shadowy figure emerged. "You're one of us now," it whispered. The past resurfaces. Morrison's torment wasn't just about the crash. It was about something much older. Memories he had buried began to surface, memories of another accident from years ago. He had been a rookie cop chasing a suspect through a dimly lit alley. The suspect had darted into traffic, and a car had struck him, killing him instantly. Morrison had blamed himself, though the incident was ruled an accident. Now the whispers reminded him of that night. "It started then," they said. "We've been watching you." A cry for help. Morrison reached out to a therapist, hoping to find some relief from his unraveling mind. During their session, he described the light, the shadows, and the whispers. The therapist listened carefully, her pen poised over her notebook. "These could be manifestations of guilt," she said. "It's not uncommon for trauma to create vivid hallucinations. But they're real," Morrison insisted. "I see them, I hear them, they're not just in my head." The therapist hesitated. Have you considered speaking with someone outside the traditional medical field? Someone who specializes in unusual phenomena? Foreshadowing the entity's intentions. That night, Morrison sat in his car, staring at the therapist's card. He considered calling her referral but hesitated. His phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen. A text from an unknown number read, "You can't run from us." You opened the door. Morrison looked up, and in the rearview mirror, he saw the shadowy figure sitting in the back seat. When he turned, the seat was empty, but the whispers lingered, filling the car with a chilling promise. "We'll see you soon." Cliffhanger ending. Morrison drove home, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. As he parked and stepped out of the car, he noticed the light again flickering faintly at the end of his street. This time, it didn't disappear. It moved closer, and within it, the shadowy figure reached out, its elongated arms stretching toward him. Morrison stumbled back, his voice a shaky whisper. "What do you want from me?" The light flickered again, and the figure whispered, "To finish what you started." The disappearing evidence. The air in the Russo family's house was heavy with tension. Mia sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open to a news article about the investigation into her mother's death. The police were set to release a statement, but something about the slow pace of the case made her uneasy. "Dad, doesn't this feel off to you?" she asked. Marco, standing by the counter with a coffee mug in hand, sighed deeply. "Mia, I don't know what to feel anymore." Mia turned back to the screen, her jaw tightening. She had replayed the dashcam footage 100 times, each viewing leaving her with more questions than answers. And now, pieces of the investigation were disappearing. Literally, missing files. The first sign of something strange came when Mia checked the forum where she'd uploaded the dashcam clip. The post, which had gained traction among paranormal enthusiasts, was gone. Her inbox had a single message from the site's administrator. "This content violates our terms. Your account has been suspended." Mia frowned. "That's impossible," she muttered. She had been careful not to violate any rules. When she tried to re-upload the footage, her internet connection cut out. Then her laptop screen flickered, and for a brief moment, she saw it again, the shadowy figure, faint but unmistakable. The police statement. Meanwhile, Officer Morrison sat at his desk in the precinct, his head pounding as he stared at the stack of reports. His commanding officer, Captain Heller, entered the room, a grim expression on his face. "Morrison, the dashcam footage from the night of the accident, it's missing," Heller said, tossing a folder onto the desk. Morrison's heart sank. "What do you mean, missing?" "The hard drive's been wiped," Heller said. "No backups, no explanation. IT's looking into it." He trailed off, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't like this." Morrison nodded, his mind racing. He didn't tell Heller about the strange lights and whispers he had been seeing, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the disappearance of the footage wasn't a coincidence. A vanishing witness. Mia's frustration grew when she tried to contact Sarah, one of the witnesses she had spoken to earlier. The phone number she had saved now went straight to voicemail, and her emails bounced back. When Mia decided to visit Sarah's apartment, she found the unit empty. A neighbor told her that Sarah had moved out suddenly, leaving no forwarding address. "She just packed up and left," the neighbor said. "Didn't even say goodbye." Mia felt a chill. Sarah had seemed terrified during their last conversation, but she hadn't mentioned any plans to leave. The disappearing evidence. Back at the precinct, Officer Decker handed Morrison a report. "You're not going to believe this," he said. Morrison scanned the document. It detailed the disappearance of Elena Russo's autopsy report and the forensic analysis of the crash site. "How does this happen?" Morrison asked, his voice rising. Decker shrugged. "It doesn't. Not unless someone's covering something up." Morrison's pulse quickened. The missing files, the wiped footage, the sudden disappearance of witnesses, it was all too deliberate. Human interference or something else? Mia confronted Marco that evening, laying out everything she had discovered. "Dad, they're hiding something," she said. "The footage is gone, witnesses are disappearing, and even the police can't explain what's happening." Marco sighed, his face drawn. "Mia, I know you want answers, but what if there aren't any? What if this is just life being cruel?" "It's not just life, Dad," Mia said, her voice shaking. "It's them." Marco frowned. "Them? The light, the shadow, whatever it is, it's behind all of this, and it's not done with us." A mysterious warning. Later that night, Mia received an email from an anonymous address. The subject line read, "Stop digging." The body of the email was short, but chilling. "They don't want the truth out. The more you push, the closer they'll come. Protect your family." Mia stared at the screen, her heart pounding. She typed a response, "Who are you?" The reply came almost instantly. "Someone who barely escaped." The shadows tightened their grip. Officer Morrison's nightmares grew worse. The shadowy figure now appeared not just in his dreams, but in reflective surfaces, mirrors, windows, even the screen of his phone. One evening, as he drove home, his dashboard lights flickered, and his radio crackled with static. A voice broke through, deep and distorted. "You can't hide." The patrol car swerved as Morrison tried to steady himself. When he looked up, the light was there again, flickering in the middle of the road. He slammed on the brake, but the light didn't disappear. Instead, it grew brighter, enveloping the car. Morrison screamed as the shadow emerged from the light, its faceless form pressing against the windshield, foreshadowing the final conflict. Morrison woke in a cold sweat, unsure if what he had seen was real or another hallucination, but the message was clear. The shadows were closing in. At the same time, Mia stared at the piece of paper Ben had found, its jagged symbols glowing faintly under the dim light of her desk lamp. She didn't know what they meant, but she could feel their weight, an ancient, oppressive force pressing against her. She turned to her laptop and began typing, determined to uncover the truth. But as she typed, her screen flickered, and the shadow appeared again, its whisper filling the room. "You're getting too close." Cliffhanger ending. The next morning, Marco found Mia's laptop open on the table. The screen cracked, and the symbols from the paper etched into the surface. Mia was gone. The specter's warning. The Russo house was suffocatingly quiet the morning Mia disappeared. Marco found her laptop on the kitchen table. The screen cracked and smeared with jagged symbols he didn't recognize. A cold dread settled over him as he called out for her, his voice echoing unanswered through the house. Ben and Sophie huddled together in the living room, their eyes wide with fear. "Where's Mia?" Sophie asked softly. Marco didn't have an answer. The stranger's arrival. That evening, as the family grappled with Mia's disappearance, a knock echoed through the house. Marco hesitated, his heart pounding as he approached the door. When he opened it, he found a man standing in the rain, his features shadowed by the hood of his jacket. "You're Marco Russo," the man said, his voice calm, but laced with urgency. "Who are you?" Marco demanded. The man pulled back his hood, revealing a gaunt face with hollow eyes. "My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I know what's happening to you." A cryptic conversation. Marco let the man inside, though every instinct told him not to. The stranger sat at the kitchen table, his movements slow and deliberate, as though the air itself resisted him. "Your daughter's disappearance, the light, the shadows, they're all connected," the man said. "And if you don't act quickly, you lose more than just her." Marco's fists clenched. "What do you mean? What's happening to my family?" The man leaned forward, his gaze unblinking. "They're called the Watchers. They've been here for centuries, feeding off grief, guilt, and fear. Every tragedy, every loss, they're always there, watching, manipulating. The light as a lure." Ben and Sophie peeked around the corner, listening as the man explained the phenomenon. "The light isn't just a distraction," he said. "It's a lure. It draws people in, forces them to make mistakes, and then the shadows claim them. Marco's voice wavered. Claim them for what? For their world, the man replied. They exist in the space between ours and theirs, and every time they take someone, the veil between grows thinner. Eventually, it will tear, and they'll come through completely. The man's warning. The stranger reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn leather journal, its pages filled with symbols similar to those on Mia's laptop. He opened it to a page marked with a crude drawing of the light and the shadow. This is what you're dealing with, he said, sliding the journal across the table. They've chosen your family. You're part of their plan now. Marco stared at the page, his hands trembling. Why us? The man's expression darkened. Because you've seen them. Once you see them, they never let you go. A desperate plea. Can we stop them? Marco asked, his voice desperate. The man hesitated. Not completely, but there's a way to push them back. You need to find the source of the light, their anchor in this world, and destroy it. Ben, unable to stay silent any longer, stepped into the room. What about Mia? Can we bring her back? The man's gaze softened. If she hasn't crossed into their world yet, yes, but you don't have much time. The children's warning. That night, Ben and Sophie described their nightmares to the stranger, their voices trembling as they recounted the shadowy figure and the light that seemed to follow them. It's always there, Sophie said, even when I close my eyes. The man nodded grimly. That's how they work. They make you afraid to sleep, afraid to think. The more fear they create, the stronger they become. He turned to Marco. You have to stay strong. If they sense your weakness, they'll use it against you. A symbolic clue. As the stranger prepared to leave, he handed Marco a piece of paper torn from his journal. It was covered in jagged symbols similar to the ones Mia had found. This will help you find their anchor, he said. But be careful. The closer you get, the harder they'll fight to stop you. Marco stared at the symbols, a mix of fear and determination in his eyes. What happens if we don't stop them? The man's voice was barely above a whisper. Then they'll take everything. Foreshadowing the final confrontation. Before leaving, the man looked back at Marco, his expression grave. I've seen families torn apart by the Watchers. Don't let them win. Marco nodded, clutching the paper tightly. We won't. As the man disappeared into the night, Marco turned to his children. We're going to get Mia back, he said firmly. No matter what it takes. Cliffhanger ending. Later that night, as the family tried to rest, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. You can't stop us. She's ours now. The light will guide you to us. Marco sat in the dark, the paper with the symbols clutched in his hand. The room grew colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch toward him. And then, just outside the window, the light appeared again, flickering like a heartbeat. The forgotten accidents. Marco Russo sat at the kitchen table, the torn page with jagged symbols spread out before him. The house was eerily silent, the air heavy with the kind of tension that left everyone on edge. Ben and Sophie sat close by, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. We're not the first, Marco said, breaking the silence. Whatever this is, it's been happening for a long time. How do you know? Sophie asked hesitantly. Marco glanced at the journal the stranger had left behind. Because it's all in here, and now we're going to find out why. Researching the past. The next day, Marco and Mia's best friend, Lily, who had joined them in their search for answers, visited the local library. They combed through old newspapers and records, looking for anything that matched the patterns described in the journal. It didn't take long to find a chilling connection. Here, Lily said, pointing to an article from 1986. The headline read, Mysterious Accident Claims Family of 3 on Old Bridge. The details were hauntingly familiar. A flickering light seen moments before the crash, witnesses reporting shadows that seemed to move unnaturally. The incident had been ruled an accident, but the witnesses' accounts hinted at something far darker. Patterns in the tragedies. As they dug deeper, Marco and Lily uncovered more incidents. 1972. A man disappeared after claiming he saw a light following him home. His body was found weeks later near an abandoned quarry, his face frozen in terror. 2001. A bus carrying a youth soccer team crashed into a ditch after the driver swerved to avoid what he described as a glowing figure in the road. Survivors spoke of shadows pressing against the windows, whispering unintelligible words. 2014. A local fisherman drowned under mysterious circumstances. His wife claimed he had been acting strangely in the weeks leading up to his death, staring into the water and mumbling about something watching him. The incident spanned decades, but the details were always the same: flickering lights, shadowy figures, and inexplicable fear. The Forgotten Bridge. One entry in the stranger's journal caught Marco's attention. It mentioned an old bridge on the outskirts of town, a place locals avoided due to its reputation for accidents and disappearances. Every story leads back here, Marco said, showing Lily the entry. This bridge is the anchor he was talking about. Lily frowned. If that's true, then it's not just a bridge, it's a portal. Ben's vision. While Marco and Lily were at the library, Ben had another nightmare. This time, he saw Mia standing on the bridge, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. "Ben, help me," she whispered, reaching out to him. But as Ben moved closer, the light appeared, swallowing Mia in its glow. Behind her, the shadowy figure loomed, its elongated arms reaching for her. Ben woke with a start, tears streaming down his face. "She's at the bridge," he whispered to Sophie. "A visit to the bridge." That evening, Marco, Ben, Sophie, and Lily drove to the old bridge. The road leading there was overgrown and rarely used, the trees on either side casting long, menacing shadows. As they approached the bridge, the air grew colder, and a faint hum filled the car. Marco's grip on the steering wheel tightened. The bridge itself was an eerie sight. Rusted railings, cracked pavement, and an unnatural stillness that seemed to swallow sound. "This is it," Marco said, stepping out of the car. "This is where it all begins." Echoes of the past. As they walked across the bridge, Ben stopped suddenly, his eyes wide. "I hear them," he said, his voice trembling. "Hear who?" Marco asked. "The people who were here before," Ben replied. "They're still here. They're trapped." Sophie clung to Marco's arm, her small frame trembling. "Dad, I don't like this place." Marco knelt in front of her. "We'll find Mia, and then we'll leave, I promise." The symbols on the bridge. Lily shone her flashlight along the bridge's surface, revealing faint carvings in the stone. They matched the symbols from the stranger's journal, the same jagged patterns that had appeared on Mia's laptop and Ben's drawing. "These symbols are everywhere," Lily said. "They're part of the ritual. The Watchers use them to mark their territory." Marco's jaw tightened. "Then we destroy them." A warning from the past. As Marco prepared to scratch out the symbols, a cold wind swept across the bridge, carrying a faint whisper. "Leave this place." The voice was neither male nor female, but it was unmistakably human. Marco froze, his heart pounding. "Did you hear that?" Lily asked, her voice barely audible. Ben nodded. "It's them. The people who didn't leave." Cliffhanger ending. Marco turned to Ben. "What are they saying?" Ben's face was pale as he whispered. "They said if we don't leave now, we'll end up like them." Before Marco could respond, the light appeared at the far end of the bridge, flickering like a dying flame. Within it, the shadowy figure emerged, its hollow eyes fixed on them. "She's waiting," it whispered. The family stared in terror as the light grew brighter, casting their own shadows long and distorted across the bridge. The lure of the lights? The air on the bridge grew colder as the flickering light at its far end pulsed like a heartbeat. Marco stood frozen, gripping Ben and Sophie's hands tightly. Behind him, Lily shone her flashlight toward the shadowy figure emerging from the glow, her breath shallow and quick. "We need to leave," she whispered. "No," Marco said firmly. "Mia's out there. I'm not leaving without her." The light pulsed again, brighter this time, and the shadows stretched across the cracked pavement like claws. "The lights pull?" Ben tugged at Marco's arm, his voice trembling. "Dad, we can't stay here. It wants us to come closer." Sophie clung to Marco's side, her small frame trembling. "I feel it too. It's calling us." Marco looked down at his children, fear etched into their young faces. "It's just a trick," he said, trying to sound confident. "We're not going to let it win." But deep down, he felt the pull, the almost magnetic urge to step toward the light. Lily's revelation. Lily scanned the symbols carved into the stone railing of the bridge, her flashlight illuminating the jagged line. "These runes," she said, her voice shaking, "they're part of the trap. They don't just mark this place, they amplify the Watcher's power." Marco frowned. "How do we stop them?" Lily hesitated. "We can't just destroy the symbols. We have to sever their connection to the light. But there's always a cost." "What cost?" Marco demanded. Lily didn't answer. The Watcher's presence. As the light grew stronger, the whispers returned, overlapping in a chaotic chorus. "Come closer. She's waiting. You can't resist." The shadowy figure stepped forward, its elongated arms reaching out. Its form shifted and twisted, as though it were barely tethered to the world. Marco felt his legs move involuntarily, drawn toward the figure. He stopped himself, shaking his head. "What do you want from us?" The whispers coalesced into a single, deep voice. "To open the way." A haunting vision. Ben cried out suddenly, clutching his head. "Dad, I see her." Marco knelt beside his son. "What do you see?" Ben's eyes were wide with fear. "Mia. She's in the light, but she's different." Lily shone her flashlight toward the glow, and for a brief moment, they all saw it. Mia's silhouette, her arms outstretched, her face partially obscured by the flickering brightness. "Mia!" Marco shouted, his voice breaking, "Come back to us." But the light swallowed her form, and the shadowy figure stepped forward again, its hollow eyes fixed on Marco. The price of resistance. Lily grabbed Marco's arm. "If we go any closer, it'll take us too." Marco shook his head, his voice trembling. "I can't leave her. She's my daughter." Lily hesitated, then pulled the torn page from the stranger's journal out of her pocket. "This symbol," she said, pointing to a circular rune. "It's a counter sigil. If we draw it, it might disrupt the light long enough to pull her back." Marco stared at the symbol. "And if it doesn't work? Then it'll know we're trying to stop it," Lily said grimly. The counter sigil. Using a piece of chalk from Sophie's backpack, Lily quickly drew the counter sigil on the pavement in front of the light. The jagged lines seemed to glow faintly as she completed the pattern. The air around them grew heavier, and the whispers turned into a roar. The light pulsed violently, and the shadowy figure recoiled, its form flickering like a dying flame. "Mia!" Marco shouted again, stepping closer to the edge of the sigil. Within the light, Mia's silhouette became clearer. Her face turned toward them, her eyes wide with terror. "Help me!" she cried. The light's retaliation. As Marco reached for Mia, the shadowy figure lunged forward, its elongated arms stretching toward him. The sigil glowed brighter, holding it back, but the strain was visible. "It's not going to hold," Lily shouted. "We need to break the connection now." Marco hesitated, torn between stepping into the light to save Mia and risking everything to sever the Watcher's hold. A desperate gamble. Ben suddenly stepped forward, holding the torn page from the stranger's journal. "Dad, I can do it," he said, his voice trembling. "No," Marco shouted, grabbing his son's arm. "It's too dangerous." But Ben shook his head. "She's my sister. I have to try." Before Marco could stop him, Ben placed the page on the ground and began tracing the symbols with his fingers, his voice trembling as he whispered the words written below them, foreshadowing the final confrontation. The light flickered violently, the shadowy figure thrashing as the sigil's glow intensified. For a moment, the connection seemed to weaken, and Mia's form grew clearer. But then the whispers turned into a deafening scream, and the shadow lunged forward, breaking through the sigil's barrier. Ben fell backward, his face pale. "I tried," he whispered. Marco pulled him close, his heart pounding. "We'll get her back," he said, his voice firm. "No matter what it takes." Cliffhanger ending. As the family retreated from the bridge, the light dimmed, and the shadow faded into the darkness. But the whispers lingered, following them back to their car. "You can't stop us. She belongs to us now. She belongs to us now. The way will open." Marco glanced at his children, determination hardening his features. "This isn't over." The final crossing. The road back from the bridge was silent, save for the rhythmic hum of the car's engine. Marco gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. Ben sat in the passenger seat, his hands trembling as he clutched the stranger's journal. In the back, Sophie stared out the window, her wide eyes reflecting the darkness outside. "We need a plan," Marco said, breaking the silence. "We can't just keep running," Lily added, her voice firm but tinged with fear. "If we don't stop this, we'll lose Mia, and maybe more." Marco nodded, his jaw clenched. "Then we go back. But this time, we're ready." Preparing for the crossing, the family gathered in the living room that night, the journal spread open on the coffee table. Lily traced the symbols with her finger, murmuring their meanings under her breath. "These runes," she said, pointing to a jagged pattern, "are protective. If we inscribe them around us, they might shield us long enough to face the Watchers." "And what about the light?" Marco asked. Lily hesitated. "The light is their anchor. If we destroy it, we break their hold. But to do that, someone has to step into it." The room fell silent. "The decision?" Marco glanced at his children, his heart heavy. "I'll go," he said. "No," Ben said quickly. "It's my fault we couldn't save her at the bridge. I should go." Marco shook his head. "You're just a kid. This isn't your burden to carry." Ben's eyes filled with tears. "She's my sister. I have to try." Sophie's small voice broke through the tension. "We can't let her stay there. We have to get her back." Lily placed a hand on Marco's shoulder. "We'll figure it out, but we have to act fast." Returning to the bridge, the family arrived at the bridge just before midnight, the air heavy with an unnatural stillness. The light was already there, flickering at the far end, brighter and more erratic than before. Lily began drawing the protective runes on the pavement, her chalk movements quick and precise. "Stay inside the circle," she warned, "no matter what happens." Marco nodded, holding Ben and Sophie close. His heart pounded as he watched the light pulse, its glow casting eerie shadows across the cracked stone. The crossing begins. As the runes glowed faintly, the light began to shift. It flickered violently, and within its glow, Mia's silhouette appeared again. "Mia!" Marco called, his voice desperate. This time, Mia didn't vanish. She turned toward them, her face pale and her eyes wide with terror. "Dad," she whispered, her voice carried by the wind. "Help me." The shadowy figure emerged from the light, its elongated arms reaching toward her, its hollow eyes fixed on Marco, and the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. "Step forward. Join her. The way must open." Confronting the Watchers, Marco stepped to the edge of the protective circle. his determination overriding his fear. "Let her go," he demanded. The shadow's voice boomed, shaking the air. "She is ours. The veil will tear, and the way will open." Lily shouted over the noise, "Marco, don't step out of the circle. That's what they want." But Mia's voice pierced through the chaos. "Dad, please." "A dangerous bargain." Marco turned to Lily. "There has to be another way." Lily hesitated before pulling out the journal. "There's a ritual," she said, her voice trembling. "It requires a trade's own life for another." Marco's stomach dropped. "What kind of trade?" Lily's eyes filled with tears. "Whoever steps into the light has to stay in her place." Ben grabbed his father's arm. "Dad, no, you can't." Marco knelt in front of his son. "Ben, if it means saving Mia, I have to." The final step. As Marco prepared to step out of the circle, the light surged, and the whispers grew deafening. But before he could move, Ben broke free from his grip and ran toward the light. "Ben, no!" Marco shouted, his voice cracking. Ben turned back, his face resolute. "It's my fault, I have to fix it." The light enveloped him, and for a moment, everything went silent. The veil breaks. Within the light, Marco saw both Ben and Mia. They stood together, their hands clasped, as the shadowy figure loomed behind them. "Mia, come back!" Marco shouted, his heart pounding. Mia stepped forward, her hand reaching out. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered. And then the light exploded, blinding everyone on the bridge. The aftermath. When Marco opened his eyes, the light was gone, and so were the shadows. The bridge was silent, the air heavy with an eerie calm. "Mia?" Marco called, his voice trembling. Mia emerged from the darkness, her face streaked with tears. "Dad," she whispered, running into his arms. But Ben was nowhere to be seen. Cliffhanger ending. As Marco held Mia close, a faint whisper echoed through the air. "The way is still open." Marco turned, his eyes scanning the darkness. The bridge was empty, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching. Back at the house, the journal sat open on the coffee table. New words had appeared on the final page. "The trade is incomplete. The light will return. You like it darker." A gate left open. The drive home was cloaked in an oppressive silence. Marco kept glancing at Mia through the rearview mirror, her tear-streaked face pale and distant. Sophie sat beside her, holding her sister's hand tightly. Lily stared out the window, her expression unreadable, while Marco's mind raced with guilt and dread. Ben was gone. Marco's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He couldn't bring himself to say what everyone was thinking. They had saved Mia, but at a cost that felt impossible to bear. The weight of grief. Back at the house, Marco set Mia and Sophie up in their room, doing his best to reassure them. But as he closed their door, he heard Mia whisper, "He's still out there. I can feel him." Marco paused, his heart sinking. "Mia, what do you mean?" She looked at him, her eyes glassy. "Ben, he's with them now, but he's not gone. Not completely." The journal's warning. Marco returned to the living room, where Lily was thumbing through the stranger's journal with trembling hands. "What does it say?" Marco asked, his voice hollow. Lily didn't look up. "The trade isn't permanent," she said quietly. "The Watchers keep their anchors tethered to this world. As long as the gate remains open, there's a chance we can bring him back." Marco's breath caught. "How?" Lily turned the page, revealing a drawing of the light surrounded by jagged runes. "We'd have to destroy the anchor completely. But that's not the worst part." Marco frowned. "What is?" Lily hesitated. "The Watchers won't let it happen without a fight." Mia's dreams. That night, Mia woke in a cold sweat, her dreams haunted by flickering lights and shadowy figures. She saw Ben standing in the middle of an endless void, his small frame surrounded by towering Watchers. Don't let them take me, he whispered. Mia sat up, gasping for air. She turned to see Sophie still sleeping peacefully, clutching a stuffed animal. But just beyond the window, she noticed a faint light flickering in the distance. The whispering shadows. Marco sat alone in the living room, staring at the journal. The house was quiet, but the air felt thick with something unseen. He rubbed his temples, his exhaustion weighing heavily on him. And then, the whispers returned. You failed him. The gate is still open. He belongs to us now. Marco stood abruptly, his eyes scanning the room. The shadows in the corners seemed to shift, curling toward him like smoke. Leave us alone, he said, his voice trembling. But the whispers only grew louder. The flickering light returns. Lily burst into the room, her face pale. Marco, it's back. What's back? He asked, his pulse quickening. The light, she said, pointing toward the window. It's outside. Marco and Lily stepped onto the porch, the cold night air biting at their skin. In the distance, the light flickered, pulsing like a heartbeat. It's trying to draw us out, Lily said. It knows we're vulnerable. Marco's jaw tightened. We're not letting it win. A desperate plan. Over the next few days, Marco and Lily prepared to confront the Watchers one final time. They gathered supplies, studied the journal, and traced the runes they would need to destroy the anchor. We have one chance, Lily said. If we fail, the gate will stay open and the Watchers will take more than just Ben. Marco nodded, his determination unwavering. Then we don't fail. The final confrontation. The family returned to the bridge under the cover of darkness, the air heavy with tension. The light was there, brighter and more erratic than ever. Marco stood at the edge of the protective runes Lily had drawn, holding a small hammer and a vial of salt water, the tools to destroy the Watcher's anchor. Mia, Sophie, stay behind us, he said, his voice firm. The whispers began almost immediately, overlapping in a chaotic chorus. You can't stop us. He is ours. The gate will remain. A glimpse of Ben. As Marco stepped toward the light, he saw Ben's silhouette within it. His son looked pale and frightened, his small hands reaching out. Dad, Ben called. Help me. Marco's heart ached, but he forced himself to focus. He splashed the salt water onto the ground, the runes glowing brighter as they began to crackle and spark. The shadowy figures lunged forward, their elongated arms stretching toward him, but the runes held them back. Almost there, Lily shouted, her voice trembling. The anchor breaks. With one final swing, Marco brought the hammer down on the ground, where the light pulsed strongest. A deafening roar filled the air as the light exploded, its glow fading into darkness. The shadowy figures shrieked, their forms disintegrating into smoke. The whispers grew fainter until they disappeared entirely. For a moment, the bridge was silent. The gate closes. Marco turned toward the spot where Ben had been. His son lay on the ground, unconscious but alive. Ben, Marco shouted, running to him. He cradled his son in his arms, tears streaming down his face. I've got you, buddy, I've got you. Ben stirred, his eyes fluttering open. Dad? Marco smiled, his voice breaking. It's okay, you're safe now. The aftermath. Back at the house, the family sat together in the living room, their bond stronger than ever. The journal lay closed on the coffee table, its once glowing symbols now faded. Is it over? Mia asked. Lily hesitated. For now. But the Watchers are patient. If the gate opens again, they'll come back. Marco nodded, his expression grim. Then we'll be ready. Epilogue. The lingering presence. As the family settled in for the night, a faint flicker appeared outside the window. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but Marco saw it. He stared into the darkness, his heart heavy with a single thought. The gate may be closed, but the watchers are never truly gone. What begins as a harrowing account of a teenager's tragic murder in Halifax slowly unfurls a tapestry of dark forces and shadowy influences that seem to linger just beneath the surface. Could the crime have been orchestrated not merely by human malice, but by something far older and more sinister? The catalyst? Halifax had always been a city with a quiet hum of resilience, where its people carried the weight of its maritime history and weathered storms both literal and figurative. But on April 2020, that hum was shattered by a single act of violence in a parking garage, leaving the community grappling with questions no one dared to ask aloud. Ahmad Maud al-Marah was only 16, a refugee who had escaped the war-torn streets of Syria with his family. He was well liked at Citadel High School, a bright student with an easy smile and a talent for soccer. But on that day, his life ended in a senseless act of brutality and Halifax was left to mourn. The courtroom echoes. Months later, in the Nova Scotia Youth Court, the stark details of Ahmad's murder were laid bare. Henry Dalton sat in the gallery, not as a journalist this time, but as an observer haunted by the questions no one seemed to ask. The prosecutor's voice filled the courtroom, recounting the timeline of events. A group of 4 teenagers meeting at a downtown shopping mall, the purchase of a large kitchen knife, and a bus ride to the Halifax shopping center. There, the group confronted Ahmad in a parking garage, culminating in a vicious assault that ended with a single, fatal stab wound to his chest. But it wasn't just the facts that unsettled Henry. It was the peculiar details woven into the testimony. The girl's chilling comment about Ahmad's shoes. "Those are nice shoes," and the unnerving indifference with which she instructed the others to get his shoes. The courtroom's fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting a pale glow over the accused teenagers, their identities shielded under the Youth Criminal Justice Act. The 14-year-old girl sat stoic, her face devoid of emotion, while the 17-year-old boy, her boyfriend and Ahmad's alleged killer, avoided eye contact with everyone, including his own defense attorney. A chilling moment. Henry couldn't shake the way the girl's voice had been described in the statements: sharp, commanding, almost otherworldly. Witnesses recalled hearing her scream during the fight, her words laced with a venom that didn't match her small frame. "Get the FK off my man." What struck Henry was how every account seemed to share a common thread: a sudden, inexplicable escalation of violence. Ahmad had grabbed the girl's boyfriend during the scuffle, and within seconds, the knife was plunged into his chest. It wasn't just rage, it was something deeper, something darker. The parking garage. After the hearing, Henry found himself drawn to the site of the attack. The parking garage was a concrete labyrinth, its walls stained with years of grime and its air heavy with the smell of gasoline and damp. He stood where Ahmad had fallen, the faint echoes of footsteps reverberating around him. A flickering fluorescent bulb above cast erratic shadows. And for a moment, Henry thought he heard something, a faint whisper, just at the edge of perception. He shook his head, chalking it up to his imagination, but as he walked back to his car, the whispers seemed to follow, growing louder with each step. The family's grief? Ahmad's parents had declined interviews with the press, their grief too raw to be shared. But a friend of the family, a man named Omar, had agreed to speak with Henry. "He was a good boy," Omar said, his voice thick with emotion. "He wanted to be a doctor. He wanted to help people." Omar's hands trembled as he recounted Ahmad's journey to Canada, escaping the horrors of war, only to meet violence in a place meant to be safe. "It's not fair," he said, tears streaming down his face. "He didn't deserve this." Henry agreed, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something about this case was off, something beyond the tragedy of human cruelty. Foreshadowing the unseen. As Henry delved deeper into the details, he began to notice strange patterns. Witnesses to the crime described a palpable sense of unease in the garage that day, as though the air itself had been heavier. One bystander, who had tried to intervene but hesitated, told Henry, "It was like I couldn't move, like something was holding me back." Another mentioned a sudden drop in temperature, moments before the fatal blow. Cliffhanger ending. That night, as Henry reviewed his notes, he opened the journal that had accompanied him on so many investigations. To his shock, a new entry appeared, written in Greaves' familiar handwriting. It begins again. "The watchers linger where blood is spilled. They see, they wait, you like it darker." The words sent a chill down his spine, and as he turned off the light, he felt it, the faint, oppressive presence of something unseen, watching him from the shadows. The threads of violence. Halifax's streets were bathed in a cold drizzle as Henry Dalton parked his car outside the courthouse archives. The trial had painted the accused teenagers as impulsive and cruel, but Henry wasn't convinced that the surface told the full story. The girl's unflinching gaze during the hearing, the boyfriend's trembling hands, and the almost choreographed precision of their crime, it all hinted at something deeper. To uncover the truth, Henry began peeling back the layers of their lives, one thread at a time. The girl with the commanding voice. Her name was withheld from the public due to her age, but in whispers around town, she was simply the girl. At just 14, she had become the focal point of the crime, described by prosecutors as the instigator and mastermind. Through interviews with classmates, neighbors, and school staff, a disturbing portrait emerged. The girl was described as charming yet manipulative, often the center of attention despite her small stature. "She always knew how to get what she wanted," said one former teacher. "She could sweet-talk you 1 minute and have you questioning yourself the next." But what stood out most were her relationships. Her boyfriend, the one who wielded the knife, seemed to orbit her like a planet around the sun. Friends recounted how she often whispered commands to him, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I don't know what it was about her," one friend admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's like she could get into your head." The boy with the knife, the 17-year-old boy accused of stabbing Ahmad, was a stark contrast to the girl. He was quiet, introverted, and largely unremarkable until he met her. Teachers noted a sharp change in his behavior after they started dating. He became withdrawn, his grades slipping, and his once gentle demeanor giving way to bursts of anger. A former classmate described a chilling encounter. "We were talking in the hallway, and she came up behind him. She didn't say anything, just looked at him, and he froze, like he was waiting for her permission to breathe." Henry's investigation uncovered something even more unsettling. Several weeks before the crime, the boy had begun drawing symbols in his notebook's intricate, jagged shapes that resembled the runes Henry had seen in Ash Grove and the House of Stolen Dream. The silent accomplices, the 2 other teenagers involved in the attack, seemed almost incidental. Both were 16, their roles limited to standing guard during the confrontation. But Henry found their silence during the trial unnerving, as though they shared an unspoken secret. When he tracked down one of their neighbors, he heard something chilling. They weren't like this before. They were good kids, but after they started hanging out with her, it was like, I don't know, like they weren't themselves anymore. A pattern of control. The deeper Henry dug, the more he began to see a pattern. The girl's influence over the group wasn't just social, it was something more profound, almost predatory. Her former best friend shared an incident that had stayed with her. "We were at her house, and she was showing me this old book. It had weird symbols in it, and she kept saying they meant something. When I asked her where she got it, she just smiled and said, 'It finds who it wants.'" The friend never went back to the girl's house after that night. The knife's journey. The knife used in the crime, a simple kitchen blade, had been purchased that day from a hardware store downtown. But Henry discovered an odd detail. According to the store clerk, the girl had chosen it herself, running her fingers along its edge with what he described as too much interest. "She said something strange," the clerk told Henry. "She looked at it and said, 'This one feels right.'" When Henry examined crime scene photos of the knife, He noticed faint scratches along the blade scratches that resembled the same jagged runes the boy had drawn in his notebook. The shadows in their lives. As Henry pieced together the teenagers' lives, a recurring theme began to emerge. Shadows. Teachers described them as though they were being watched, their once bright personalities dimmed by something invisible. One neighbor recounted seeing the girl standing in her backyard late at night, staring into the woods. It was strange, the neighbor said. She was just standing there, like she was waiting for something to come out. Even the boy's younger brother noticed changes. He started keeping his bedroom door locked all the time. One night, I heard him talking to someone, but when I knocked, he said no one was there. Foreshadowing the unseen, Henry's notes were filled with details that painted a disturbing picture of control, fear, and something more. It wasn't just the girl's dominance over the group or the boy's strange drawings, it was the way everyone described the presence, a sense of being watched. He began to suspect that the crime wasn't just a product of teenage cruelty. Something else had been at play, something darker that lingered just out of sight. Cliffhanger ending. That night, as Henry sat in his motel room reviewing his findings, his phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. The message contained only one sentence. "You see their strings, but do you see who pulls them?" Henry looked around the room, his heart pounding. The shadows on the walls seemed to stretch, curling toward him like fingers. And then the whispers began again. The haunted city? The rain fell steadily as Henry Dalton wandered the streets of Halifax, his footsteps echoing off cobblestone alleyways. This city, with its deep harbor and centuries-old buildings, carried a strange duality, picturesque by day, foreboding by night. For years, Halifax had been celebrated for its maritime history, its welcoming community, and its unyielding spirit. But beneath the surface was a darker story, one of tragedy, bloodshed, and whispers of forces that seemed to linger just out of reach. A history of shadows. Henry began his investigation at the Halifax Public Archives, a towering building that smelled of aged paper and varnished wood. He pored over records detailing the city's past, from its founding in 1749 to the present. Certain dates jumped out at him, their stories chilling. The Halifax explosion 1917, the largest non-nuclear explosion in history, which obliterated entire neighborhoods and claimed nearly 2,000 lives. Survivors described strange lights in the sky before the blast, and some insisted they heard voices screaming warnings moments before impact. The ghost of Citadel Hill, a recurring tale of a spectral figure seen patrolling the fort's ramparts, always on nights when the fog rolls in thick. Soldiers stationed there reported feeling a suffocating presence and hearing footsteps in empty hallways. The disappearances on Barrington Street. In the 1917s, multiple individuals vanished without a trace along this busy thoroughfare. Witnesses described seeing shadowy figures following the victims before they disappeared. The more Henry read, the more he realized that Halifax wasn't just a city with a tragic history, it was a city haunted by something deeper. The parking garage's dark reputation. Henry turned his focus to the crime scene. The Halifax Shopping Center parking garage. Its utilitarian design, with its fluorescent lights and echoing chambers, seemed innocuous. But as Henry dug into its history, he uncovered a string of unsettling incidents. 1998. A man was found dead in his car, the cause listed as suicide. Witnesses later claimed to have heard him arguing with someone moments before his death, though no one was seen entering or leaving the garage. 2005. A woman reported seeing a faceless figure standing by the elevator late at night. Security footage showed no one there, but the woman refused to return to the garage. 2012. A maintenance worker quit after claiming to hear whispers while repairing a broken light. He described the voices as cold and commanding, urging him to leave while you still can. These stories weren't in any official records, but Henry found them in old newspaper clippings and forgotten forum posts. The words of terrified residents buried under layers of denial. The influence of place. Henry met with Dr. Eleanor Vance, a local historian who specialized in the relationship between geography and folklore. Over coffee in a quiet cafe, she shared her insights. Halifax has always been a city with a strange energy, she said, her eyes thoughtful. The sea brings life, but it also brings death. Storms, shipwrecks, tragedies, they leave scars, not just on the land, but on the people. Henry nodded. You think that energy could influence what happens here? Make people act differently? Dr. Vance hesitated. There's a theory in folklore called residual haunting. It's the idea that places with enough trauma can replay that energy, like a record on a loop. But what you're describing sounds more active. Active how? Henry asked. Like something is feeding on it, she said, lowering her voice. And growing stronger. The whispering stones. One recurring theme in Henry's research was the presence of strange symbols, etched into stone or hidden in plain sight across the city. They matched the jagged runes he'd seen in the boy's notebook and on the knife. At Dr. Vance's suggestion, Henry visited a small, overgrown park on the outskirts of the city. There, he found an old stone monument covered in moss. The carvings on its surface were faint but unmistakable. The same twisting, angular patterns he'd seen before. The monument's inscription was barely legible, but Henry managed to make out a chilling phrase, "To those who guard the veil." A city of echoes. As Henry walked the city streets that night, he felt the weight of its history pressing against him. Halifax wasn't just a backdrop for Ahmad's murder, it was a character in the story, its shadow stretching into every corner of the crime. A man on Spring Garden Road told him about hearing laughter late at night in an empty alley. A bartender on Argyle Street described bottles toppling over by themselves, as though pushed by unseen hands. These weren't just ghost stories. They were pieces of a puzzle Henry couldn't yet see, foreshadowing the unseen. Back in his motel room, Henry spread out his notes. The symbols, the tragedies, the whispers that seemed to tie everything together. The journal sat on the desk beside him, its leather cover cracked and worn. When he opened it, a new entry greeted him. They do not forget. They do not forgive. The city is their stage, and the show is far from over. You like it darker. Henry slammed the journal shut, his breath ragged. The rain outside turned to hail, the sharp taps on the window sounding like fingers trying to claw their way in. And then, just as he turned off the light, he heard it again, the faintest whisper, coming from the corner of the room. The knife's whisper. The knife rested on a steel tray under harsh fluorescent lights, its blade gleaming faintly despite the fingerprints smudging its surface. Henry Dalton stared at it through the glass barrier of the evidence room, a chill running down his spine. This was the weapon that had ended Ahmad's life. A simple kitchen knife purchased hours before the attack. The knife had become more than a tool of violence. In the testimonies, in the whispers of the witnesses, it seemed to carry a presence of its own, a dark energy that no one dared name. The blade's path. To understand the knife's story, Henry retraced its journey, beginning at the downtown hardware store where it was purchased. The clerk, a wiry man with tired eyes, remembered the girl who had selected the knife. She wasn't like the other kids, he said, his voice low. The others were messing around, laughing, but she was focused, like she knew exactly what she wanted. Henry pressed for more details. Did she say anything unusual? The clerk hesitated, his fingers tapping the counter. She ran her finger along the edge, testing it. Then she smiled and said, "This one feels right." It gave me the creeps, to be honest. The knife had been unremarkable before that moment, one of dozens lined up on the shelf. But something about her touch seemed to change it, as though she'd imbued it with purpose. The scratches on the blade. In the crime scene photos, Henry had noticed faint scratches along the blade, too precise to be random. He sent a request to a forensic analyst he'd worked with in the past, asking for closer examination. When the results came back, they confirmed his suspicions. The scratches weren't accidental. They formed symbols, jagged and angular, matching the runes Henry had seen in the boy's notebook and on the monument in the overgrown park. The analyst, a meticulous man not given to flights of fancy, included a personal note with the report. These markings aren't normal wear and tear. They were made deliberately, and honestly, they give me the creeps. The Whispering Blade. Henry visited the evidence room again, this time with permission to examine the knife more closely. As the technician handed him a pair of gloves, he couldn't shake the feeling that everyone in the room seemed relieved to put distance between themselves and the blade. The moment Henry picked it up, the surrounding air seemed to grow colder. He held the knife under the fluorescent light, tilting it to study the scratches. And then he heard it, a faint whisper, so soft it could have been imagined. His breath caught, and he glanced around. The technician was busy cataloging items, oblivious. But the whisper came again, clearer this time. Not yet. Henry set the knife down, his heart pounding. A history of violence? Determined to learn more, Henry dug into the knife's origins. Through a combination of serial numbers and supplier records, he traced it back to a manufacturer in Ontario. The company's representative, a cheerful woman named Grace, seemed puzzled by his questions. "It's just a standard kitchen knife," she said. "We've sold thousands of them." But as Henry pressed her, Grace admitted something strange. "There was a recall a few years ago," she said hesitantly. "Nothing safety related, it was more superstitious. Some customers claimed the knives were cursed." She laughed nervously. "Silly, right? But there were enough complaints that we pulled the batch." The curse of the cutlery. Henry tracked down one of the customers who had returned their knife during the recall. A retired chef named Victor agreed to meet him at a cafe, his hands trembling as he recounted his experience. "It wasn't the knife itself," Victor said, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. "It was what happened when I used it. I started hearing things, whispers, like voices in another room. And the dreams." Victor trailed off, his face pale. "What dreams?" Henry pressed. Victor shook his head. "They're not dreams, they're warnings. And the knife, it's not just a knife, it's a doorway." The blade's purpose. Back in his motel room, Henry laid out his notes. The scratches, the whispers, the stories of previous owners. The knife wasn't just a weapon, it was a catalyst, a conduit for something darker. The journal on the desk seemed to call to him, its leather cover gleaming in the dim light. He hesitated before opening it, half expecting the pages to reveal some new horror. This time, the entry was brief but chilling. "The blade carries their will. It takes, but it also gives. You like it darker." The cult connection? Henry remembered the girl's fascination with the blade. The way she'd run her finger along its edge and whispered that it felt right. She hadn't chosen the knife by chance, she'd recognized it. Through further investigation, Henry discovered a thread linking the knife to a shadowy group known as the Keepers of the Abyss. They were whispered about in Halifax's dark corners, their influence tied to the strange symbols and whispered voices that followed him at every turn. The knife wasn't just a tool for murder. It was part of a ritual, its blade marked to channel the Watcher's will, foreshadowing the final act. As Henry pieced everything together, he realized the crime wasn't impulsive. It had been orchestrated, the knife's presence not just incidental, but essential. That night, as he tried to sleep, he felt the weight of the blade pressing on his thoughts. He dreamed of shadows with hollow eyes and a voice that whispered the same phrase, over and over. "The blade is the beginning, you are the end." Cliffhanger ending. Henry woke with a start, the whisper still echoing in his ears. On the nightstand beside him lay the journal, open to a new page. Written in Greaves' familiar hand were the words, "The blade remembers, and so will you." Henry slammed the journal shut, but the whispers didn't stop. They followed him into the dark, a reminder that the Watchers were always waiting. The girl and the shadows. The girl was an enigma. Even in a courtroom filled with tension and grief, her presence had stood out, a 14-year-old whose calm demeanor felt unnervingly at odds with the brutality of the crime she had orchestrated. Her actions, her words, her influence over the group, all of it hinted at something darker. Henry Dalton knew that if he was to unravel the mystery behind Ahmad's murder, he needed to understand her. The contradictions. She was always quiet, one of her former teachers told Henry. Not shy, exactly, just still, like she was watching everyone and waiting for something. Henry pressed for more details. Did she ever act out? Show signs of aggression? The teacher hesitated. Not really, but there was this one time. A boy made fun of her during recess, and she just stared at him, didn't say a word. The next day, he came to school with a broken arm. Said he fell down the stairs, but he wouldn't look anyone in the eye. It was a small incident, but it fit with the pattern Henry was beginning to see. A quiet girl with an unspoken power over those around her. The family dynamic. The girl's home life was a patchwork of contradictions. Her mother described her as a sweet, loving child who helped with chores and rarely caused trouble. But her father, speaking in a low voice as though afraid of being overheard, painted a different picture. She was always different, he admitted. She talked to herself at night, like she was having a conversation with someone. When I'd ask her about it, she'd just smile and say, "It's nothing, Daddy." Henry probed further. Did she ever mention the symbols, the ones scratched into the knife? The father's face darkened. She used to draw them, he said, on the walls, on her notebooks, even carved one into her bedroom door. I painted over it, but it always came back. The incident at school. A former classmate recounted a chilling story. There was this time in math class. The teacher called on her, and she didn't answer. Just kept staring at the window. When the teacher yelled, she finally turned around and said, "They're here." The classmate shivered at the memory. We all laughed, thought she was joking, but then the lights flickered, and the fire alarm went off. Nobody could explain it. Henry couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a coincidence. The girl's behavior seemed to coincide with unexplained phenomena, as though her presence disrupted the normal flow of reality. The shadows in her room. Determined to uncover more, Henry visited the girl's house with her parents' reluctant permission. Her room was untouched since her arrest, a shrine to a life interrupted. The walls were painted a pale pink, but faint marks were visible beneath the surface. Scratches in the shape of the same jagged runes Henry had seen on the knife. Her desk was cluttered with notebooks, their pages filled with cryptic symbols and sketches of faceless figures. In one notebook, Henry found a chilling phrase repeated over and over. They see me, they guide me, they wait for me. The night in the woods. One of the girl's friends reluctantly agreed to speak with Henry. The two had drifted apart months before the crime, but the friend remembered a specific night that had haunted her. She asked me to meet her in the woods behind her house, the friend said, her voice trembling. When I got there, she was standing in this circle of candles, holding that knife. She said she wanted to show me something. The friend refused to elaborate, but Henry pressed her. What happened next? She looked at me and said, "Do you feel it? They're watching." I got out of there and never talked to her again. The cult connection deepened. Henry began to suspect that the girl wasn't acting alone. Her behavior mirrored accounts he'd read about the Keepers of the Abyss, a shadowy group that used rituals and symbols to commune with an ancient force they called the Watchers. He visited a local occult expert, Dr. Rachel Mercer, who confirmed his suspicion. The symbols she's drawing, they're summoning runes. They're meant to attract attention, to invite something into our world. Henry felt a chill. What happens if they succeed? Dr. Mercer's expression darkened. The Watchers feed on fear and despair. If they gain a foothold, they'll use her as a vessel to spread their influence. The prison visit. Determined to confront her directly, Henry arranged to visit the girl at the youth detention center. She sat across from him in the sterile visitation room, her small frame dwarfed by the chair. "You're the journalist," she said without preamble, her voice calm. Henry nodded. "Why did you do it?" Her lips curved into a faint smile. Because they told me to. Who? Her smile widened. You already know. The room seemed to darken, the fluorescent lights flickering. Henry leaned closer, his voice steady. The Watchers? The girl's expression turned serious. They're not just watching anymore. They're waiting for you, foreshadowing the climax. Henry left the detention center shaken, her words echoing in his mind. The girl wasn't just a troubled teenager. She was a conduit, a piece in a game far larger than he had imagined. That night, as he sat in his motel room, the journal opened on its own. New words appeared on the page, written in Greaves' familiar hand. She is the bridge. You are the gate. Together, you will end the veil. You like it darker. The shadows in the room seemed to ripple, and for the first time, Henry felt truly afraid. The pack. Henry Dalton had spent weeks untangling the web of influence surrounding the crime. The girl's commanding presence, the mysterious symbols, and the whispers of something older and darker were pieces of a puzzle that pointed to one disturbing conclusion. The teenagers hadn't acted alone. There was a connection between them, a bond forged in secrecy and fear. Henry suspected it was more than friendship or loyalty. It was a pact. The night they met, Henry began with the group's origins, interviewing classmates, neighbors, and anyone who had crossed paths with the teenagers. They weren't even friends before this, one classmate revealed. It's like one day, they just started hanging out. It didn't make sense as she was always the loner, and they had their own group. Another student recalled a specific moment. It was after that party in the woods. They came back, different. Henry pressed for details, but no one knew much about the party, only that it had taken place deep in the forest on a cold October night. The forest ritual. Through careful digging, Henry uncovered more about that night. The group had been seen heading into the woods with backpacks and flashlights. They returned hours later, silent and distant, their expressions unreadable. A former friend of one of the accomplices finally opened up to Henry, her voice trembling as she spoke. They wouldn't tell me what happened, but I saw the girl carrying something, a small, wooden box. She said it was for them. Henry's pulse quickened. The box of shadows had resurfaced. The pact unveiled. Henry tracked down one of the teenager's older siblings, a young man named Trevor, who was reluctant to talk but finally agreed after some coaxing. They were always whispering about the Watchers, Trevor said. At first, I thought it was some dumb game, but then I saw the symbols. They draw them on their hands, their notebooks, even on the walls in the basement. Henry asked about the pact. Trevor hesitated before answering. I heard them one night, in the basement. They were standing in a circle, holding hands. The girl was saying something. It didn't sound like English. It was wrong. What happened after that? Henry asked. Trevor's face paled. I don't know, but the next day, they wouldn't look me in the eye. And my little brother, he started having nightmares. He said they were coming for him. The shadows' influence. Henry dug deeper into the group's behavior after the night in the woods. Teachers described a sudden shift, better grades, sharper focus, but also a strange detachment. They weren't like normal teenagers anymore. One teacher said, it was like they knew something the rest of us didn't, something that made them cold. Henry discovered a chilling pattern. Each member of the group had started keeping a journal, their pages filled with the same jagged symbols and phrases. They watch us. We are chosen. The veil must open. The first sacrifice. One entry stood out in particular, written by the boy who wielded the knife. It read, we gave them what they wanted, but it's not enough. They need more. Henry's stomach churned. The group had already crossed a line before Ahmad's murder, but what had they done, and who, or what, had demanded it? The Watchers' demands. Henry returned to Dr. Rachel Mercer, the occult expert, to show her the journals and the symbols. She studied them with growing unease. This isn't just idle doodling, she said. These are summoning runes. They're designed to attract attention, to call something to this world. Something like the Watchers? Henry asked. Dr. Mercer nodded grimly. The pact is their way of maintaining control. The more fear and despair they create, the stronger the Watchers become. The group fractures. Through interviews and court transcript, Henry uncovered cracks in the group's unity. One of the accomplices had tried to distance themselves after the murder, claiming they didn't sign up for this. A chilling exchange in one of their text messages revealed the extent of the girl's control. Accomplice, we shouldn't have done it. We need to stop. The girl, you can't stop. They chose you, you're part of this now. The message ended with a symbol, one of the runes Henry had come to associate with the Watchers. The whispered confession. One night, Henry received a call from a blocked number. The voice on the other end was shaky, barely above a whisper. You're looking for answers, the caller said, but you won't like them. Who is this? Henry asked. The caller hesitated before responding. I was there, that night in the woods. I didn't know what we were doing. I thought it was just a game, but then she started talking to them. To whom? The Watchers. The voice said. They told us what to do, and we did it. The line went dead, leaving Henry gripping his phone in the dark, foreshadowing the climax. Henry's notes painted a terrifying picture. The group had been manipulated, their actions guided by something beyond human understanding. The Watchers weren't just observing, they were directing. That night, the journal on his desk opened on its own. The latest entry read, "The pact is not broken. It never is. They wait for the gate, you like it darker." Henry turned to look at the corner of the room, where the shadows seemed thicker than they should have been, and for the first time, he saw them move. The victim's echo. The rain had let up by the time Henry Dalton parked outside the small, unassuming house in Halifax's West End. The home belonged to Omar, a close friend of the Al-Marak family, who had agreed to speak about the strange occurrences following Ahmad's death. Henry wasn't sure what to expect, but the tension in Omar's voice during their earlier phone call had been undeniable. "There's something wrong, Mr. Dalton," he had said. "It's not just grief. It's something else." A house of mourning. Omar greeted Henry at the door, his face lined with exhaustion. The living room was dimly lit, the air heavy with the scent of incense. A photo of Ahmad sat on the mantel, surrounded by candles and flowers. "He was like a nephew to me," Omar said, his voice breaking. "But since he's gone, it feels like he hasn't really left." Henry leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Omar hesitated before continuing. "His mother, she hears him at night, footsteps in the hallway, his voice calling her name. She thought she was imagining it, but I've heard it too. A mother's grief." Ahmad's mother, Layla, was a slight woman with tired eyes and a voice thick with sorrow. She invited Henry into the kitchen, where they sat over cups of strong tea. "He was a good boy," she said, clutching her son's photo, "always smiling, always helping. He didn't deserve this." Henry nodded, letting her speak. "But now I don't know." Her hands trembled as she set the photo down. "I hear him. At night, I hear his voice. I know it's not possible, but it's him. He's trying to tell me something." "What does he say?" Henry asked gently. Layla's eyes filled with tears. "He says, 'Don't let them take me.'" The shadow in the room. Henry asked if he could see Ahmad's bedroom. Layla led him upstairs, the creak of the wooden steps echoing in the stillness. The room was untouched, a shrine to a life cut short. Soccer trophies lined the shelves, and a half-finished homework assignment sat on the desk. But something about the room felt wrong. The air was colder here, and the light from the window seemed dimmer, as though the room itself was holding its breath. Henry noticed faint scratches on the walls, similar to the runes he'd seen before. He took out his phone to photograph them, but as he snapped the picture, the screen flickered. Then, just for a moment, he saw a shadow in the corner of the room, tall, still, and watching. When he turned, it was gone. The nightmares begin. Henry's next stop was Ahmad's best friend. Samir, a quiet teenager who had grown even more withdrawn since the murder. He was my brother, Samir said, his voice barely above a whisper. We did everything together. Henry asked if Samir had noticed anything strange since Ahmad's death. The boy hesitated, then nodded. I keep having these dreams, he said. I'm in the parking garage, but it's empty. I can hear Ahmad calling me, but I can't find it. Then the shadows start moving, and I wake up. Samir looked at Henry, his eyes wide with fear. They're not just dreams, are they? Echoes at the funeral. Henry also spoke with others who had attended Ahmad's funeral. Many described a sense of unease during the service, cold spots in the air, flickering candles, and the sensation of being watched. One mourner, an older man named Yusef, recounted an experience that left him shaken. I was standing by the grave, praying, he said, and I felt a hand on my shoulder, but when I turned, no one was there. The journal's warning. That night, Henry returned to his motel, his mind racing with everything he'd learned. He spread his notes across the desk, the connections between Ahmad's death and the Watchers becoming clearer. The journal lay open beside him, its pages blank, but as Henry stared at it, new words began to appear, scrawled in Greaves' familiar hand. The veil thins where blood is spilled. The echoes call to those who listen. But beware, the Watchers always hear. The final message. Henry's phone buzzed with a new text message. The number was unknown, but the words sent a chill down his spine. He wasn't there first, and he won't be there last. You're next. Henry looked around the room, his heart pounding. The shadows on the walls seemed to move, curling toward him like smoke. For the first time, Henry realized he wasn't just investigating the Watchers. He was becoming part of their story. Cliffhanger ending? That night, as Henry drifted into a restless sleep, he dreamed of Ahmad standing in the parking garage, his eyes wide with terror. They're coming, Ahmad whispered. You have to stop them. Henry woke with a start. The journal opened beside him. A new entry had appeared. The echoes are only the beginning. The gate draws closer. You like it darker. The witnesses' silence. The parking garage had been eerily quiet on the day of Ahmad Mar al-Marak's murder, save for the echoes of the violent struggle that claimed his life. Yet, Henry Dalton's investigation revealed that several witnesses had been present, hidden in the shadows of parked cars or ascending the concrete ramps. None had intervened, and their silence haunted the case like an unanswered scream. Why didn't they step forward? What held them back? The first witness, Henry's first stop, was a coffee shop downtown, where he met with Sarah, a young woman who had been in the parking garage that day. Her hands trembled as she stirred her latte, her eyes darting around the room. I heard it all, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The shouting, the screams, and then it went quiet. Henry leaned forward. Why didn't you go to help? Sarah's face contorted with guilt. I wanted to, but I couldn't. It felt like something was pressing down on me, holding me in place. She hesitated, then added, and then I saw them. The shadows. They weren't normal, they were alive. The man in the SUV, another witness, a middle-aged man named Paul, had been sitting in his SUV a few levels above the scene of the crime. He had watched the teenagers converge on Ahmad through his rearview mirror but made no move to intervene. I didn't know what to do, Paul said, his voice defensive. It all happened so fast. Henry pressed him. But you had time to call for help, didn't you? Paul's expression darkened. I tried. I swear I did. But my phone, it wouldn't work. The screen went black, and I couldn't get it to turn back on. Henry noted the trembling in Paul's hands as he continued. And then, I felt it. Like something was watching me, something hungry. The security guard? One of the most puzzling aspects of the case was the absence of any intervention from the on-duty security guard. Henry tracked him down to a small apartment on the outskirts of Halifax, where the man had been living in near isolation since the murder. I was making my rounds, the guard said, his voice heavy with regret. I heard the commotion and ran to the scene, but he trailed off, his hands fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. But what? Henry urged. The guard looked up, his eyes hollow. They were there. Tall, dark figures standing at the edges of the garage. They didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I knew if I got any closer, I wouldn't come back. Henry felt a chill run down his spine. Did anyone else see them? The guard shook his head. They're not meant to be seen, not by people like us. A pattern of paralysis. As Henry pieced together the accounts, a disturbing pattern emerged. Each witness described a sense of overwhelming dread, a physical weight that froze them in place. Some mentioned hearing whispers, indistinct but insistent, urging them to stay back. One witness, a teenager who had been skateboarding nearby, described it as like being underwater, where everything moves in slow motion, and you can't catch your breath. The unseen force. Dr. Rachel Mercer, the occult expert, who had been helping Henry, offered an explanation. It's not uncommon in cases of mass trauma for people to freeze, she said. But what you're describing goes beyond that. It sounds like an external force, a deliberate suppression of will. Henry frowned. You mean the Watchers? Dr. Mercer nodded. They don't just observe, they manipulate. Fear is their tool, and silence is their ally. The Shadow's purpose? Henry began to suspect that the Watchers had deliberately silenced the witnesses to ensure the murder played out as planned. The parking garage wasn't just a crime scene, it was a stage, and the Shadows had choreographed every move. The journal, as always, seemed to confirm his suspicions. A new entry appeared, written in Greaves' familiar hand. The silence was not theirs, it was given to them. A gift and a curse, ensuring the show goes on. A test of courage, Henry returned to the parking garage one last time, determined to confront whatever force had silenced the witnesses. He stood in the spot where Ahmad had fallen, the air around him cold and heavy. The shadows on the walls seemed to deepen, stretching toward him. He felt the weight now, the same oppressive presence the witnesses had described. And then, he heard the whispers. Turn back. This is not for you. You like it darker. Henry stood his ground, his flashlight cutting through the gloom. The shadows recoiled, but the whispers grew louder, blending into a deafening roar. Cliffhanger ending. When Henry finally left the garage, he was shaken, but resolute. He knew now that the Watchers had been behind everything. The murder, the silence, the fear. But as he reached his motel, his phone buzzed with a new text from an unknown number. You stood where he fell. Now they see you. Henry looked up, his reflection in the mirror distorted by the shadows that seemed to gather behind him. The witnesses' silence. The parking garage had been eerily quiet on the day of Ahmad Mar al-Marak's murder, save for the echoes of the violent struggle that claimed his life. Yet, Henry Dalton's investigation revealed that several witnesses had been present, hidden in the shadows of parked cars or ascending the concrete ramps. None had intervened, and their silence haunted the case like an unanswered scream. Why didn't they step forward? What held them back? The first witness, Henry's first stop, was a coffee shop downtown, where he met with Sarah, a young woman who had been in the parking garage that day. Her hands trembled as she stirred her latte, her eyes darting around the room. I heard it all, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The shouting, the screams, and then it went quiet. Henry leaned forward. Why didn't you go to help? Sarah's face contorted with guilt. I wanted to, but I couldn't. It felt like something was pressing down on me, holding me in place. She hesitated, then added, and then I saw them. The shadows. They weren't normal, they were alive. The man in the SUV, another witness, a middle-aged man named Paul, had been sitting in his SUV a few levels above the scene of the crime. He had watched the teenagers converge on Ahmad through his rearview mirror but made no move to intervene. I didn't know what to do, Paul said, his voice defensive. It all happened so fast. Henry pressed him. But you had time to call for help, didn't you? Paul's expression darkened. I tried. I swear I did. But my phone, it wouldn't work. The screen went black, and I couldn't get it to turn back on. Henry noted the trembling in Paul's hands as he continued. And then, I felt it. Like something was watching me, something hungry. The security guard? One of the most puzzling aspects of the case was the absence of any intervention from the on-duty security guard. Henry tracked him down to a small apartment on the outskirts of Halifax, where the man had been living in near isolation since the murder. I was making my rounds, the guard said, his voice heavy with regret. I heard the commotion and ran to the scene, but he trailed off, his hands fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. But what? Henry urged. The guard looked up, his eyes hollow. They were there. Tall, dark figures standing at the edges of the garage. They didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I knew, if I got any closer, I wouldn't come back. Henry felt a chill run down his spine. Did anyone else see them? The guard shook his head. They're not meant to be seen. Not by people like us. A pattern of paralysis. As Henry pieced together the accounts, a disturbing pattern emerged. Each witness described a sense of overwhelming dread, a physical weight that froze them in place. Some mentioned hearing whispers, indistinct but insistent, urging them to stay back. One witness, a teenager who had been skateboarding nearby, described it as like being underwater, where everything moves in slow motion, and you can't catch your breath. The unseen force. Dr. Rachel Mercer, the occult expert, who had been helping Henry, offered an explanation. It's not uncommon in cases of mass trauma for people to freeze, she said. But what you're describing goes beyond that. It sounds like an external force, a deliberate suppression of will. Henry frowned. You mean the Watchers? Dr. Mercer nodded. They don't just observe, they manipulate. Fear is their tool, and silence is their ally. The Shadow's purpose? Henry began to suspect that the Watchers had deliberately silenced the witnesses to ensure the murder played out as planned. The parking garage wasn't just a crime scene, it was a stage, and the Shadows had choreographed every move. The journal, as always, seemed to confirm his suspicions. A new entry appeared, written in Greaves' familiar hand. The silence was not theirs. It was given to them. A gift and a curse, ensuring the show goes on. A test of courage, Henry returned to the parking garage one last time, determined to confront whatever force had silenced the witnesses. He stood in the spot where Ahmad had fallen, the air around him cold and heavy. The shadows on the walls seemed to deepen, stretching toward him. He felt the weight now, the same oppressive presence the witnesses had described. And then, he heard the whispers. Turn back. This is not for you. You like it darker. Henry stood his ground, his flashlight cutting through the gloom. The shadows recoiled, but the whispers grew louder, blending into a deafening roar. Cliffhanger ending. When Henry finally left the garage, he was shaken, but resolute. He knew now that the Watchers had been behind everything, the murder, the silence, the fear. But as he reached his motel, his phone buzzed with a new text from an unknown number. You stood where he fell. Now they see you. Henry looked up, his reflection in the mirror distorted by the shadows that seemed to gather behind him. The dark influence. Halifax had always carried an air of resilience, a city built on storms, tragedies, and the ceaseless motion of the sea. But as Henry Dalton dug deeper into its history, he found a disturbing undercurrent that connected the city's darkest moments. There was a pattern, a cycle of violence and despair that seemed to repeat itself. And at the center of it all was an ancient, malevolent force that had woven itself into the fabric of the city. The cycles of violence? Henry began by charting Halifax's major tragedies, layering them against reports of disappearances, murders, and unexplained phenomena. The results were chilling. 1749, The founding of Halifax saw numerous conflicts with the Mi'kmaq people. Early settlers reported hearing cries in the woods at night, and some claimed to see shadowy figures stalking their camps. 1917. The Halifax explosion, which claimed nearly 2,000 lives, was preceded by weeks of strange lights over the harbor. Survivors described hearing whispers in the moments before the blast. 1970s. A string of disappearances along Barrington Street coincided with a spike in sightings of faceless figures lurking near alleyways and abandoned buildings. Present day. Ahmaud's murder, surrounded by whispers, runes, and shadows, fit eerily into this timeline. It wasn't random, it was deliberate. The Whispering Veil? Henry consulted Dr. Rachel Mercer again, this time bringing her to the timeline. As she studied it, her brow furrowed. This isn't just residual energy, she said. This is something far more organized. It's almost as if the city itself is being used as a stage. For what? Henry asked. Dr. Mercer hesitated. To thin the veil between worlds. The Watchers don't just observe, they need access. And every act of violence, every tragedy, weakens the barrier. The forgotten rituals. Henry's next stop was a small museum on the outskirts of Halifax, dedicated to the city's maritime history. There, he found records of strange rituals practiced by the city's early settlers. A handwritten journal from 1751 detailed an encounter with a group of settlers who had built altars in the woods. The author described symbols carved into trees and whispered prayers to unseen entities. One entry stood out. They said the shadows would protect them from the storms, but at what cost? I saw one tonight, a figure with no face, standing at the edge of the camp. I cannot stay here. The Watcher's name. Through interviews and research, Henry uncovered a recurring name associated with the Watchers, Moron. It's an old Mi'kmaq word, Dr. Mercer explained. It roughly translates to those who see but are not seen. Henry frowned. Did the Mi'kmaq believe in them? Dr. Mercer nodded. They believed the Moraine were ancient spirits, neither good nor evil, but hungry. They fed on fear, despair, and conflict. The settlers, in their desperation to survive, made deals with them, deals that came at a terrible price. The influence in the present. As Henry connected the dots, he realized that the Watchers weren't just relics of the past. Their influence had grown stronger, seeping into the city's modern tragedy. A retired police officer, who had worked on some of the Barrington Street disappearances, shared a chilling account. We'd find the victims' belongings, purses, shoes, sometimes even wallets, but no bodies. It was like they'd just vanished, and there was always this feeling like we were being watched. The mark of the Watchers. Henry began to notice the Watchers' symbols etched into the architecture of Halifax itself, hidden in the ironwork of old fences, carved into the stone foundations of historic buildings, and even graffitied on alley walls. He photographed the symbols and sent them to Dr. Mercer, who confirmed their significance. These are summoning runes, she said. Someone, or something, is keeping the Watchers tethered here. The true purpose. The journal provided the final piece of the puzzle. A new entry appeared, written in Greaves' distinctive hand. The Watchers do not act without reason. Each cycle draws them closer to permanence. The city is their feeding ground, and the veil is thinning. When it tears, they will come through. You like it darker. The Watchers weren't just influencing events, they were orchestrating them. The Whispering Shadows. Henry returned to the parking garage that night, determined to confront the Watchers. As he stood where Ahmaud had fallen, the air grew heavy, and the whispers returned. They weren't just sounds, they were words, overlapping and chaotic. You see us. You carry us. The gate opens for you. The surrounding shadows deepen, twisting into humanoid forms. Henry's flashlight flickered, and for the first time, he saw their faces, or rather, their lack of faces. Why me? He demanded, his voice trembling. The Watchers didn't answer. Instead, they stepped closer, their presence suffocating. Cliffhanger ending. Henry fled the garage, the shadows following him to the edge of the street before dissolving into the darkness. Back in his motel room, he opened the journal, hoping for guidance. Instead, he found a single sentence. "The Watchers are ready. The veil will tear. You like it darker." Henry felt a chill as the room seemed to dim. For the first time, he realized he wasn't just investigating the Watchers. He was their next target. Shadows unveiled. Henry Dalton sat alone in his motel room, staring at the journal on the desk. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator. But he knew he wasn't alone. The shadows that had been following him were thicker now, their presence palpable. The latest entry in the journal was etched in Greaves' spidery handwriting. "The gate is here. The Watchers wait no longer. They will come through." Henry knew what it meant. The Watchers had chosen him, not just as an investigator, but as the final piece of their plan. The final journey. The journal's pages had led Henry to every dark corner of Halifax, uncovering the Watchers' influence in ways he never imagined. Now, the final page contained only an address: the Harbor Gate. Henry knew the place, a dilapidated shipping yard on the edge of the city. It had been abandoned for decades, its rusting cranes and crumbling warehouses casting jagged silhouettes against the skyline. As he drove through the empty streets, the air grew heavier, the shadows on the buildings stretching unnaturally. By the time he reached the harbor, the whispers had begun again, faint but insistent. "He comes. The gate opens. We are ready." The harbor gate. The shipping yard was a labyrinth of rusted machinery and decaying structures. Henry parked his car and stepped into the darkness, the flashlight in his hand casting a narrow beam. The whispers grew louder as he moved deeper into the yard, their words overlapping in a chaotic symphony. The ground beneath his feet felt unstable, as though the very earth was shifting. And then he saw it. The gate. It wasn't a physical structure but a shimmering distortion in the air, a vertical ripple that seemed to pulse with dark energy. Around it, the Watchers stood in a silent circle, their faceless forms outlined against the eerie light. The Watchers speak. As Henry approached, the whispers coalesced into a single voice, deep, resonant, and all-encompassing. "You are the gatekeeper." Henry stopped, his breath catching in his throat. "Why me?" he demanded. The voice replied, "Because you see. Because you carry the truth. Because you like it darker." Henry's grip on the flashlight tightened. "What do you want?" "To come through. To feed. To be." The choice? The journal had warned Henry about this moment. The Watchers needed him to open the gate, to allow their presence to fully manifest in the world. But there was something else. Something Greaves had hinted at but never fully explained. The gate couldn't be opened without a cost. If Henry agreed, he would lose himself, becoming a vessel for the Watchers. If he refused, they would remain trapped, but at the expense of his sanity. "Why should I help you?" Henry asked, his voice trembling. The Watchers stepped closer, their forms towering over him. "Because resistance is meaningless. We are already here. You are already ours." The final revelation. Henry's mind raced as he tried to piece together the clues Greaves had left him. The Watchers fed fear and despair, using humans as tools to weaken the veil. But there was one thing they couldn't take without permission: his will. The journal's final entry echoed in his mind. "The gate opens for those who choose." Henry realized the Watchers had manipulated him at every turn, leading him to this moment. But they had underestimated him. The defiance. "I won't do it," Henry said, his voice steady. The Watchers' forms rippled, their whispers rising into a cacophony of anger and frustration. The air around the gate shimmered violently, and the ground beneath Henry's feet cracked. "You will open it," the voice demanded. "No," Henry said firmly. "I won't let you through." He pulled the box of shadows from his bag, its carvings glowing faintly. The Watchers recoiled as he opened the box, its light spilling out like a beacon. The sacrifice. The light from the box began to draw the Watchers in, their forms twisting and writhing as they were pulled toward it. The gate trembled, its energy dimming. But Henry could feel the cost. The box wasn't just a tool, it was a prison. By using it, he was binding the Watchers to himself, trapping their presence within his own mind. Pain lanced through him as the last of the Watchers was consumed by the box. The gate collapsed, leaving only silence. The aftermath. Henry collapsed to the ground, the box still glowing faintly in his hands. The Watchers were gone, but their whispers lingered in his mind, a constant reminder of the price he had paid. He looked around the harbor, now eerily quiet. The distortion in the air was gone, and the shadows no longer moved unnaturally. But Henry knew the Watchers weren't truly gone. They were inside him now, waiting for the day when the box would open again. Epilogue. Weeks later, Henry sat at his desk, writing the final entry in his notes. The journal lay closed beside him, its pages blank. The box of shadows was locked away, buried deep where no one could find it. But the whispers never stopped. As Henry stared into the darkness of his room, he heard the voice again, faint but clear. "You like it darker."